So Margaret Owen, the matriarch of Widows' Rights Internationally, who received Order of the British Empire from the Queen in recognition of the work that she's doing all over the world. And we respect her greatly. As Margaret has said, she's sort of gone through the entire spectrum of what widows all over the world go through. But that is not the purpose of today's meeting. The purpose of today's meeting is not to go any further into the problem. What we want is the solution. And the solution can only come with us working collectively. In a lot of cultures, we know about the proverb that says, when you take a broom and you try to sweep with just one stick of the broom, you can't do much. But when you put together the several sticks of the broom, you can sweep more efficiently and much better. And therefore, we are calling on everyone here to join us as advocates. Take a good look at the recommendations. It's not how much we speak on this side of the road, but how much we can go back and impact on our individual governments. Therein lies the secret to ensuring that all these practices that Margaret highlighted here this afternoon will be sent to where they belong, and that is to the history books. So I would just like to zero in on a few and why we would like you to join us and why they are up there as recommendations. Concerning the gaps in data, when you need to plan, most of us in the room have embarked on some plan or the other, formally, informally. It is when you know the numbers that you are dealing with that you can effectively and efficiently plan. And therefore, we need to participate, be it at country level, be it amongst the circle of influence within which we operate. What are the numbers of widows that we are talking about? Concerning the harmful traditional practices or whatever it is that we're looking at, whether it's widows of conflict, HIV and AIDS widows, what are the numbers that we are dealing with? Once we are armed with appropriate data, verifiable data, we can then use the numbers, especially disaggregated numbers, as an advocacy tool with our governments to say, these are the exact numbers we're dealing with and these are their circumstances. And we can then stand up for them. Another aspect of the recommendation that I am passionately, feel very passionately about, and permit me for being selfish here, is it is time that this issue receives a special rapporteur at the UN. We're getting there. When Margaret and I were at a panel in 2000, invited by UNICEF, we asked for an International Widows' Day. And eventually, 11 years later, an International Widows' Day came into being. We asked for a rapporteur on widows' rights. We are still expecting that. So I believe that we put these things on the table, and if we continue advocating for them, that these will happen. I will not take all the recommendations because there are other speakers coming after me. Thank you very much for listening.
Hands up, who was at Beijing? That was the first time we ever had an international workshop on widowhood. That's where it all began, at Beijing, and that's quite a long time ago. So this time, in 2012, we've really got to be sure that this meeting makes its impact and that we actually achieve some of the recommendations. I want to ask now Rosie Singh from WHR Nepal, Widows for Human Rights, Single Women's Group. They have been absolutely amazing, and it is in South Asia, through Women for Human Rights, Single Women's Group, that we set up the very first regional consortium of widows groups in the 6 countries of the region. It's a bit patchy, but the idea is there, that we've got Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Afghanistan. It's slightly patchy, and sometimes it's very difficult to get this really going in Afghanistan. It's very difficult to get it working for the Tamil widows, over 90,000 of them in Sri Lanka. But we've been invited now to go to Pakistan in June to set up a national federation of widows in Pakistan, so it's growing. And this idea of having a regional voice for widows, I hope it will be taken up soon in, sorry about my mobile, I don't understand it. I don't understand this new mobile, it keeps making funny noises. But we hope that we will get regional groups in Africa and maybe a regional group in the Middle East, because in the Middle East you think of the Arab Spring and all the widows being created every day in Syria today, in Libya. So we want to do this, so that this is all started from WHR setting up the first regional group, because really all the widows, we need one voice, one solid voice. Over to you.
Nepalese society is patriarchal, where powerful goddesses are women, but still in real life they are given the subordinate roles. Women are given the subordinate roles. These are the glimpses of the subordination of women. There is the physical abuse of women, and gender roles in the community are divided. That is, the women are basically involved in the household chores. In the strong patriarchal society, how can women exist? How can women without husbands exist, live and survive? WHR is a non-governmental organization which established in 1994 and is working for the socio-cultural, economic and political rights of widows of Nepal. The major vision of WHR is to create the just and equitable society where there will be no discrimination on the basis of marital status. Till date, WHR has organized over 84,000 widows in 1,050 village development committees and municipalities of 73 districts of Nepal in order to make them as agents of change in their respective community. As per the situational analysis of the widows, there are many inhuman cultural practices, code of conduct, ill cultural practices and restrictions, for example, restriction in mobility, in food. And are these extreme human rights violations for widows? There are several early marriage practices, and daughters are seen as a burden. There is lack of access to education. Widows' work are not valued as productive work, and they are mainly dependent on the male members of the family. Till date, 67% of the women are between 20 to 35 years of age, among which 33% of them are literate, and around 2% of widows have only obtained the high degree of education. So, all these, don't you think that this situation engenders exploitation on widows by family and community members? Even Article 1 of CEDAW states that there should be no discrimination on the basis of marital status. But Nepal is the signatory of CEDAW articles, but is CEDAW article really being implemented? This is the status of widows in Nepal, which I have already discussed. And the conflict-affected displaced widows, there are many conflict-affected displaced widows in Nepal. Where can this section of population seek the justice? Has the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which addresses the right of conflict-affected women, actually been implemented? These are the questions which need to be considered and which we need to discuss about. Where is the provision of fulfillment of right to basic needs? Where is the consolidated package of service and proper mechanisms? Isn't a holistic approach to service necessary? WHR works has the 5 main pillars of WHR, which are Opportunity Fund, Aadhar, SWAG, Chahari and Rahat. WHR has its own decentralization strategy. WHR is also in an alliance called as Sankalpa, and we have different stakeholders of WHR. And these are the stakeholders of WHR, which includes policymakers, government, family members, religious leaders, local agencies, media, women organizations, bilateral agencies, INGOs, NGOs and individuals. WHR works at the grassroots level, where it basically organizes the widows in groups and mobilizes them as change agents. Chahari is the safe space that is built for the widows in order to provide them different skill development and capacity building trainings, and then also to rehabilitate them for certain duration so that they can go back into their society and community and reintegrate them back into their own community and work. The progress which WHR has made till date is that widows no longer need to take the permission of the male family members to obtain the passport. Widows no longer need to reach the age of 60 to get monthly allowance from the government. The property of the deceased husband which the wife inherits no longer needs to be returned to her husband's family after remarriage. Widows do not have to remain in the chastity of her deceased husband to inherit the property. Widows no longer need to reach the age of 35 to inherit deceased husband's property. And there is no more government's policy that to provide Nepalese to men who marry widows. Widows no longer require the consent of their adult sons and unmarried daughters to sell or hand over property ownership. At the SAARC level, WHR, along with our international focal person Margaret Owen, we are very thankful to her. And WHR is also nominated as Secretariat for South Asian Network for Widows Empowerment in Development, which is the SANWID. I would like to present some of the common issues of widows. Widows are almost all widows face the problems related to the burden of extra work, exploitation, violence, sense of loneliness and insecurity. There is still the lack of qualitative and quantitative authentic data on widowhood. Widows are often excluded from income-generating activities, due to which they are compelled to depend upon the male members of their family. There is still the negligence in the increasing number of widows, which is proliferated with the conflict. Widows are stereotyped exclusively as either victims or beneficiaries, and they are not recognized as the change agents and the key resources in the community. Widows face various discriminative legal and government policies and programs. There is lack of education, which consequently increases the dependency of the widows in their male members of the family, and due to which they are more vulnerable to exploitation, violence and abuse. Widows are often isolated, they are not banding together, their voices unheard, and they are not recognized as agents of change. There is limited, restricted or lack of access to services such as health, nutrition, housing and social security schemes. Most widows face the psychological problems and mental stress and are tormented by psychological changes in the children after the death of their husband. There is significant increase in homelessness, displacement, migration, property grabbing and chasing off of widows due to conflict, and are highly vulnerable to trafficking and abuse. Widows face the problem of lack of employment opportunities and secure shelter, due to which, with the initiation of WHR, it has built several safe spaces in various districts of Nepal, where they are provided various skill development trainings, capacity building trainings, and they are as the safe space for the widows. Widows are still blamed for their husband's death and are considered as to be the harbingers of the misfortunate. Still, the widowhood is not recognized as the issue that needs to be addressed. I hope you all can join us in Widows Movement. How can you join us in Widows Movement? Support for economic empowerment of widows and provide help for the educational opportunities for widows and their children. WCHAD has one of the components, Opportunity Fund, which has been providing the scholarship and educational support to the children of single women and to the single women for their higher education. So you can support us for the education of the children and for the single women. Provide financial and technical support for WCHAD activities for the empowerment of widows of Nepal. Support for building safe space for widows for their holistic development.
Thank you.
So, we'll be more discussing on the issues of the widows and the recommendations, and request all of you to join us in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've now just got one more. We're going to look at what we're going to do about it. We know what the issues are. It's really, after that, when you've heard our marvellous, distinguished Devaki Jain, who I've known for many, many years, will talk on behalf of the Guild of Service of India about what we have, what we can do to address widowhood in India, widowhood in the region, and I suppose widowhood everywhere. Devaki Jain.
And I really, speaking on behalf of Mohini Giri, who I would like to mention has not only done enormously good work on correcting some of the terrible experiences that you saw on these slides, but since she had fallen ill, she asked me to come here and read her statement. And while I was reading it again to brief myself, I think it maybe you will permit me and Margaret too, if I don't read all of it, but read only the highlights, and you can report to her that I. So Mohini has done something which really we should put on the agenda of what you can do, and that is the Guild of Services has set up extraordinarily, as she calls it, homely homes for widows. The same place where widows are driven in India to live by the Ganges and what is called do penance for their sins and live on charity and food thrown at them by pilgrims. She has converted that into fantastic hostels for widows, and she has given them a whole range of income generating activities. And the latest, which I must tell you because I thought was brilliant, was that they are doing sanitary towels for ₹1 each. I mean, sanitary towels in all our countries cost a lot, and for poor people to have sanitary towels, almost unbelievable. And they are doing it by shredding cloth and by getting a machine. So there are things that, products that these women are doing, food, clothing, others, which are not only giving them income generation but self-esteem, which a woman gets when she earns her livelihood. So Mohini and Margaret was there, convened a conference on this issue with the Government of India, and 2 or 3 issues that came up, I think, are things which I would like to call from India. That is, as we were analyzing the issue of widowhood, which I think we could not see better than my sister from Nepal and others, we also realized that there's an issue of single women. A whole lot of women in India are single because their husbands have left them after marriage, or they have just decided not to marry. And the law doesn't give them the kind of rights and the kind of tax relief and things that. So what she did was she converted the conference on widows to a conference on single women, and then has set up a network of single women in India across the country, and she's building up networks in each state of India and an all-India network of single women. Now what does that do? That does exactly what she was saying. It will enable us to do lobbying for laws which give them what we want. For example, more hostels for single women to live, small legislation which enables them to have an identity. Very often a woman is abandoned, and if she's abandoned, she doesn't have an address or an identity, so she's not allowed to get the cards which gives her ration and others at subsidized prices. So, and then we got statistics which unfortunately she didn't bring here, but we found that there are a huge percentage of single women in India which we didn't even know about. Women of 30, women of 40, women who are not necessarily widows. So this is also a thought that you might consider, that widowhood is of course the most punishing thing in South Asia, and I'm sure it's the same in East Asia. I don't know enough about Africa, but it's the most terrible experience. Since I recently got widowed, I realized that apart from the fact that I'm not poor and therefore I'm not in that situation, the kind of stigma on widowhood is something that you feel like dying immediately after your husband dies. But you have so much stigma because of social customs in India. Mohini Giri, the woman who started all this in India, says that she's not allowed to go to weddings because she's considered inauspicious. And so these are pains which not necessarily associated with poverty, but associated with society's fear of widows as being somehow witches who bring bad luck to everybody. Because losing a husband means your God is punishing you for something that you sinned, and therefore you lost your husband, and therefore you must do something very evil. These are all myths which enable, and when you're poor, everything gets exacerbated. I mean, the poor woman who is widowed is perhaps the last creature in the whole world. She's the worst off in the whole. So Mohini Giris and the Guild of Services have done all this, and recently she has talked about her national consultation on agrarian women, in which resource persons from various states of India participated. And I'll conclude with this recommendation. The government's policies and schemes should be oriented to provide justice, livelihood, resources and opportunities for an inclusive development for the aam aurat, which in Hindi means the common woman, the woman of the masses. And single women is not the need to redefine single women. It should be broadened to include unmarried and even deserted women and other categories. And she asked that the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India, should set up a national commission on single women. And the commission will not only collate information, data on this category of people, but examine current policies, programs, how far it reaches them, examine and collect information and make proposals to be included in various flagship schemes, look at policy directives. Another subcategory would be to look at microcredit, microfinance against this overall commission of inquiry. Put together the various ways in which state governments enable single women and widows pension. The government must incorporate provisions of International Convention for Elimination of Discrimination. This is what Margaret and we all decided in Delhi. UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and other international human rights treaties and international law into appropriate domestic law so as to ensure promotion and protection of civil and political rights, economic, social and cultural rights, along with right to develop in an unbiased and positive manner. The optional protocol of International Convention for Elimination of Discrimination of Women and other international human rights treaties should be immediately signed and ratified by the Government of India, which hasn't done that. Land acquisition, relief and rehabilitation policy needs to take into account the rights and needs of people, especially women, especially widows, especially single women, and this has to be brought into the Indian legislation. I'm running through it because I think we really need time to discuss and pledge ourselves to this cause. And I thank you, Margaret, for giving all of us an opportunity.
Terrible explosions in Baghdad and outside Baghdad. And she said that some of these suicide bombers were women. Women suicide bombers who were probably women who'd been raped, who were rape victims, who had nowhere to go. If they went back to their families, they'd be killed as honor killings. You know, Iraq, they're saying Iraq is far worse than it was actually under Saddam Hussein for women now, because there's a complete breakdown, it's complete anarchy, and women are constantly being abducted, raped, kidnapped. There was there was an incredible prostitution and trafficking report delivered here by Yana Mohammed 2 years ago at the CSW, and she had death threats because she published it. And many of the people trafficked and prostituted were either the daughters of widows or young widows. And before I open I just think that widowhood is not a woman's issue, it's a whole society's issue. It's an issue for everyone, because it's what happens when widowhood is such a stigma, and you all know that, all of you who've come from Africa as well, about what happens to the children what happens to the children of widows when the widows can no longer afford to keep them in school, to educate them, and must depend upon child labour? Or if they have to choose who to take out of school, of course they take out the girl child. And this whole thing now increases the child marriage, and the child marriage to a much older man, who then dies and leaves the child widow. So it's an issue for the whole of society, because the way it expands and extends poverty across the generations. So I want you to, I think it's now 3:10, and you had a good idea, Zorin, that we'd perhaps spend the first quarter of an hour on the issues and then the rest on the recommendations. So let's now open the floor to all of you to talk about whether we've got it right about the issues. One of the very interesting and frightening things that I heard about when I was at the conference in Delhi with you, Devaki, was about the land grabbing by transnational, by industrial, the people who are actually grabbing land that which actually women could use and grow food and have food security. That was something awful, and we're hearing that from other areas as well, from Latin America, about the incredible industrial multinational corporation actually of land grabbing. And I remember in India it was Veena Agarwal who had an idea of setting up in India a sort of land allocation bank that would actually rent land to women, because it's this lack of land and this absolutely total powerlessness in the rural areas that makes also women so vulnerable then to sexual abuse and sexual assault and so on. So that land, to be able to own land is so important. Just before I stop, you mentioned using the sea door. Is anybody here from Tanzania? But we've just started using the optional protocol, Article 8 of the optional protocol. It's practically finished, and we can pass it round to you. A wonderful lawyer, colleague of mine called Dr. Monica Manoham of Tanzania, and we're actually using the optional protocol for asking the CEDAW committee to start an inquiry in Tanzania into what the government is doing on widowhood, because in Tanzania, as Help Age reported, just 2 years ago, something like 400 widows are stoned to death as witches, and there's child widows and all the same things that you talk about. So now let's open it to all of you.
Nigeria.
Yes, Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Do you want to come up to the microphone? Is that better if you come up?
No, I think I speak loud enough.
All right, okay. Okay.
I would like to state that the problem of widowhood, first of all, I must thank this body for wonderful work, for the collections done from Nepal, from all those. It's really a step in the right direction. It means we are heading there. But I would like to note and state here that the problem of widowhood in my country, and I think elsewhere, sounds insurmountable because it's a woman's problem. The women are the contributory factors. In the family, the customs that are being perpetrated on the women, those who spearhead it are women. We are our own enemies. And until that attitude, we need an attitudinal change here. Until that changes, you find out that the problem will keep on mounting. When you lose your husband, the first people to discriminate against you, the first people to make sure that all those heinous laws are executed on you are the women in the family. Take for instance in Nigeria, and from the area I come from, the Igbo extract. The little changes that has been done so far are those that were granted even by the men, not the women themselves. Take the mourning period for instance. It used to be the norm that the woman should mourn the husband for 2 years. Later on, this was reduced to 1 year. When it was for 2 years, you won't barb your hair, you won't do that. Until after the 2 years, then your hair will be straight. You won't shower within the morning period of the 3 months. You won't shower. You are locked up. Later on, these issues were being changed one after the other from one community to the other. But those who helped out were the men in the family. Those who spoke out were the men in the family, not the women. The issue of barbing your hair, having to scrape your hair, those who are saying don't barb if you don't want to barb now are the men, not the women. So the widowhood issue, until we become a sister's keeper in our communities, things will keep on moving from bad to worse. Even Christianity in certain instances has not changed things. Rather, they've mixed it up with custom. It's like, no, this is customary, don't bring religion to it. And we say that when it suits us most. So I think we have to educate our women. The capital point there is education. The only way the girls will not go through this is when they are educated. The women who have escaped it to a minimum or whatever level are those who are educated, whereby you can use as a lawyer. I have advocated for women their lands, especially if you don't have a male child in the family. Count yourself out, you don't have any property in that family. Even the ones you've worked with your husband in the urban areas, while you are still in mourning, your brother-in-laws, your sister-in-laws are in a grabbing procedure. But what we need to do here is strong education.
Thank you.
The second issue is empowerment. Those widows, I tell people when I counsel them, I say widowhood is not a cause. It's a means to an end. But people now take it as if even they themselves don't move out of that. They want to take it as a sorrow situation whereby you have to sympathize with them. I tell them it's not a sympathy issue. It's an issue that you have to take the bull by the horn and move on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The issue of that data, I think is very, very key. Because sometimes you make a point for widows in your work. For example, you work around the issues of microfinance, and you make such point, but you don't really have the data of the women in those communities that are widows. So it's I think where your organization should start, or most of the organizations that are member organizations of the network should start, is by doing projects around data collection of how many widows are in this community, how many are in the, for example, in Nigeria, we might not be able to say we have 84,000 widows or 1 million widows. I think pilots should be encouraged and funded. For example, when the Nepal presenter was talking, I think she made mention of about 84,000 widows in about how many districts? 70-something districts. I think that should be a major place to start, because nations are adopting gender budgeting as a key macroeconomic policy. And for you to be able to really budget for issues around widows, you should have data. I think that should be a major place to start.
I'd like to add something for our petition or recommendations, and following what that colleague say about data. I'm talking about Mozambique. In terms of data, before coming, I went to the National Institute of Statistics. What's happened is we don't have, most of the time we marry as a common law. It is not registered in census. This is one point we have to raise that. So the number of widows are so low when we were compared. So you have to think about that. I think Nepal is a good example in terms of how to start data, to get the data. And as you told, without data, we can't you can't demand or you know, to challenge the government. The other thing is about land. We have good law in terms of land for women and men, and also has been men, women has get the title of the land. Actually, in these times, we have the situation of grabbing the land because the extractive industry. In Mozambique, we have this valid and big enterprise who work in 39 countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and the government give the land, good land for them, for to invest in iron, in charcoal, and so it's a big issues for the widows. And Helpage International is doing a study for this resettlement, which they are some good story that they block the train to transport the charcoal from the place of where they explore to the port. And the Helpage International is doing a study of how many widows and older people are being affected by these resettlements. So resettlement for many reasons. The other issue that I'm going to raise is training the personnel of justice, even community leaders and community judges, how to take care, how to judge the situation of people, older people and widows, to be accused of witchcraft. And in South Africa, there is not a law, there is a procedure that if you accuse someone as a witch, you have to be also to go to the court. Yeah, in South Africa. So you are trying to do this in Mozambique because more and more, because the economic situation, because all the problems, there are more people, widows are accused, and older people as witchcraft. We don't know in fact, because in our region, the forced unions, early marriage, forced unions, has been all the tradition and culture. We don't have enough information about how many youngsters and adolescents they are widows, but it is a work to be done, also to force and to challenge the government, to challenge UN about that. Thank you very much.
After the genocide in 1994, and what I want to share with you is that the widows in Rwanda, they took their own responsibility, being a woman, being widows, being mothers, and being Rwandan citizens. They took the pioneer responsibility of rebuild the country, rebuild themselves, and rebuild our society. You will excuse me, I'm a French speaker, but I try to speak in English. Yeah. About widows. I say that it is a special country because it has set on the policy, the inclusive policy, which supported women, widows, and those who are not widows to participate actively in the country development. Now I can share with you that after the genocide, even the infrastructures, houses, everything was destroyed. And those who were more affected are women and children. We have widows, but we have another type of widows. I can say widows because there are so many women who their husbands are in the prison, being the perpetrators of the genocide. So we have, it's a big complex. It is not like in other countries, when being a widow is only because you have lost your husband. But in our country, there are those whose the husband are in the prison, and those are living the same situation as those who lost their husband. But also, one side they are facing the frustration of their husband who has been killed. At the other side, they are frustrated because their husband has killed others. And the main problem, the main issue is related to the children. You can feel the feeling of the children who have the parents in the prison being killed other citizens. But at the other side, we have the children who are also frustrated by being with other children whose their parents killed their parents. So it's a complex situation. But if we are talking about the widow situation here, I want to tell you that the widows make a difference in Rwanda. They took their own responsibility. In our culture, the women don't use to construct the house. Never. It was the men who went on the roof of the house. But the women took the responsibility to rebuild their house. I remember in 1995, the widows has associated in the widow of genocide, survivors of the genocide. They were grouped in an association, and the first activities they started to do is to construct the house. So they started to construct in a village. So that a village still now is the image of the resilience of the women in Rwanda. And starting there, they continued to face even the culture barriers, but they tried to break the barriers to continue their life. Another thing they did is not to lose the hope, but to face the future by participating to participate in the election, to be present at the decision-making level. That is the strength we can now exchange with others, that women in Rwanda has took their position in decision-making levels. And this helped us to give our voice. If men have failed to rule positively our country till we face the genocide, now women has a voice to vote yes or no. Rwanda is the first country in the world to have many women in the parliament. Yeah. Now we are 54% in the parliament. So I can majority, yes.
And some of the women are widows in Parliament. Many of them are
many widows in the Parliament, many widows in administration, everywhere. To be widow, don't say your life is finished. Yeah. You are there and you can achieve something. And laws like land, the law on the land. Now all the women in Rwanda have access to the land. We have the land registration, and all women is registered on the land. Yeah. And all the women, we have the education for all. It is also a new law. Education for all. So all the women has access to education to avoid to go in past situations. But also, the government, those women influence the government to vote the laws which are favorable for the welfare of the women. Now we can have this land registration for all, education for all, health insurance for all, even the widow have access to the health service, to education, and so on. So the government also, to increase the livelihood of all, for example, while the majority is living by agriculture, now they started the politic of land use consolidation. And this is, they consolidate their land. We have a small country, and to help even those widows and those women, vulnerable women who the husband are in the prison. Now the new policy is to consolidate the land, and people are cultivating together. So the government has the possibility to give a good seed, fertilizer, to help everybody to have enough in terms of food security. So the women has really played their role, even they are widow or not widow, but we were aware that we have a role, a big role to play in the decision making in our country. That's why we have pushed until now the woman is standing up and speak out for our rights in our country. I forgot to present my organization. I'm here on behalf of ACCORD, and in our activity we support those vulnerable women to pay their land registration, to increase their livelihood, and we will have opportunity to talk more about this with Farina, who will present on Friday.
Thank you very much. Please sound a note of caution concerning that. You find on a daily basis that men have problems in their companies, in their organizations, in big conglomerates. They never say men are men's worst enemies, and yet they do terrible things to one another. So we've got to be careful about using that against ourselves. I quite agree that, we should be our sisters' keepers. We have researched concerning the daughters of the lineage in Nigeria, the Umuada, and what happens is they are acting out the script of the traditional leaders. And there's something called silent acquiescence, where the script of the traditional leader is being acted out by the women, and they are then seen as the perpetrators. But the traditional leaders who can stand up and make a proclamation don't say anything. So I just wanted to correct that notion. And then to also just speak to the issue about the widows by virtue of the fact that their husbands have died, those who are incarcerated, but let's not forget also the widows or the women of the disappeared. Sometimes they suffer more because they don't even know whether their husbands are dead or alive in a conflict situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Debbie J, thank you so much. There's one's to the international community, one to governments, and the others are to the CEDAW. But two, we're all here together. So we're asking here at the UN CSW, we're asking that they appoint a special representative on widowhood. And not, or if they wouldn't do that, should we say widowhood in conflict zones? I'm not sure about that one, and I want some discussion what we want to ask for. We want them to commission a special report on widowhood probably in conflict-afflicted countries, like the Grassa Machel one on children in conflict. That is desperately needed, and we nearly got it before, but anyway, they didn't do it. We want the UN Women now, because UN Women Office in South Asia has prioritized widows and have 3-year programs in Sri Lanka, Nepal and India. They've seen it in South Asia, but I think they've seen it because of this incredible work by Mohini Giri in India and by Lily Thapa and her group in Nepal. And so we really want them to have this in Africa. We want the UN women here at headquarters to actually establish a special section to address widowhood in the context of peace building, violence against women. Do you agree?
Yes.
And then we want to adopt...
The first one, I don't think that you should... No, I thought you were asking for comments before we move on.
Oh, yes.
On the first one, I don't think we should restrict it to conflict zones.
Yes.
Because, you know,
All
we
right.
need
So
someone
do we
to-
want a special representative on widowhood?
Yes.
Hands up. Is that what we want to ask for?
Yes.
And you're signing that thing that's going round, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's not
Okay.
restricted to conflict zones.
Thank you. Do we want to commission a special report on widowhood?
Yes.
Do we want the UN women to establish a special section to address widowhood in the context of the things that Michelle Bachelet wants?
Yes.
And do we want a UN resolution on widowhood?
Yes.
Can that include single women though?
I think, well, what do you think? You want it to be on single women, I want it to be on widowhood, because I think widowhood is so special, and it's across the regions, across religions. The moment you talk about single women, you've got divorced women, you've got this, let them do that. No, I think, do you agree that we focus on widowhood and wives of the missing?
Yeah. Strategically, if you could just say, as in Rwanda, I mean, sometimes it helps if we give a good example of...
I mean, it was amazing when Rwanda talked to me after this meeting, because I was there with Vega twice. And then... Yes?
Are you saying widow to include some of the other things that came out then? If you're not accepting missing a woman, are you using the women of the disappeared, the women of the incarcerated, or are you specifically really
Well,
using
what do you think?
widows?
I think we've got to be very clear and sharp. And we're talking about widows, but we're also talking about those half widows who don't know whether they are widows or not, which are the wives of the disappeared or the missing, because that is part of that widowhood story. And then with the CEDAW, we were asking for a general recommendation from the CEDAW. We got a general recommendation on older women last year after a lot of work. So are we going to go on? And you can find this online, the dossier we did to the CEDAW 3 years ago or 2 years ago. A dossier on widowhood, issues of discrimination. So that's going through, asking for the general recommendation. But at the moment, please, in all those countries where your governments have signed optional protocols, use it on behalf of the widows. We're doing it in Tanzania and we're sharing it with you. Is there anything that do you agree all these recommendations?
Yes.
And if you have ones that you thinking about it and looking at it afterwards that you want to add or put in, my email address is director.wpd@gmail.com. If you've got you want to change it or you've got other ideas, put it in. But please, with all the stuff that we've done this morning, use it now to influence the text